Hi everybody, welcome to another edition of Star Citizen Live. This time we're calling it Building a Vehicle Experience. I'm your host, Jared Huckabee, and we are here with two members of our newly established vehicle experience team, Mr. John Crewe and David Colson. How you doing, guys?
Very good. Thanks, Jared. Nice to be back.
Yeah, you are back. You're here in LA.
Yeah.
Now, you're gonna, folks who have followed the project for some time know that the beginning of every year is surmounted with a number of planning weeks, planning sessions. So various teams come together, they have their big 2020 planning session, talk about what we learned last year, what lessons we can bring forward, what we did right, what we did wrong. That's part of what we'll discuss here today. And then, of course, we will get to answering questions from you guys, the backers and the viewers who are watching. Throughout the program, if you want to submit questions to either John or David, you can submit your questions by typing them into either the live Twitch chat or our Spectrum chat up on robertspaceindustries.com. Just please preface your question with the word question in capital letters surrounded by brackets. That's going to help our team pull it out from all the other conversation. So right off the bat, I want to talk about last year before we get into the questions. 2019 was a pretty big year for Star Citizen. A lot of content, a lot of new stuff come out, a lot of changes to the flight experience. None of this show is about vehicle experience, but we'll start with the flight stuff here. Talk to me about your year here. How was last year for the flight experience?
Last year was crazy. We launched a completely new flight model, completely revamped flight model, and
that was a long time in the making. That was
a long
started
time
in 2018.
So we launched that, and that was a huge learning experience, especially because it kind of brought a renewed interest among the community to sort of chat about the flight experience, and we learned a lot about the combat and flight in that whole process. And then we also kind of went forward in the year with more improvements, like we tried hover mode, which ended up not being exactly what we wanted, but we learned a lot in doing that. And so the subsequent changes that we've started to implement, like proximity assist, is like on the back of that learning, right, that we've done with the community. So we think we're getting like better and better as time goes by. And so hopefully in 2020, we can take all of that learning experience that we got last year for the community and, make it even better.
Okay. How about you, John?
Yeah, from an overall side, 2019, we sort of reorganized a lot of the vehicle teams. We introduced Pillar Talk last year, where we briefly talked about what the pillars are. So the vehicle teams got their own pillar, and it's essentially 5 teams within that vehicle pillar now. And so there's 2 vehicle feature teams, there's 2 vehicle content teams, and there's the new vehicle experience team. And by putting them all together under one director, myself, and working with the other directors, has enabled us to do a lot better planning in terms of this team's going to be working on this, they're going to need some support from this team. It ties into the content at this point. And at the start of the year, it wasn't quite there. But as we got towards the end of the year and into this year, we're starting to try and deliver on ships with features coming with them. Maybe it's not the full feature, maybe it's just a taste of it, but it allows that ship to sort of work with that. And then content-wise, we sort of delivered ships of all sizes last year, which was a huge learning experience. So we had the Archimedes, which is one of the smallest, if not the smallest ship in the game, and then with the 8-night jump, which is 200 odd meters bigger than the Archimedes. So we learned a lot about those 2 very different styles of making ships. The Defender as well was a big challenge last year in terms of learning alien art styles, which
the first ship of an entirely new alien species.
First ship of a new race or new manufacturer is always a tricky one, and we learned a lot planning-wise on how to accommodate that. That's gone into the Prowler, and then we'll go into the Merchantman as well.
Let's go back to what you said about hover mode. It might be a source. It might be a source, but I don't know how you feel about it.
It's getting triggered.
I tend to look at it. We were talking about this a little bit before we started the show. I tend to look at it as a huge win for the community, because while the work on hover mode isn't in the game right now, what it accomplished was it proved the entire concept of the shared development experience with Star Citizen. We were able to develop a thing, put it out into testing in an alpha state and not in the finished game state. So, get the feedback, find out what we didn't know, which is always a part of game development, and then iterate and improve on that from there. Change course where necessary. Can take the parts that did work, that we did like, and move them forward with something like proximity assist. I think overall it was a tremendous victory, an example of what works about the Star Citizen process.
Part of all of game development is like learning what the game is as you're kind of getting closer and closer to the vision that you have in your head. You end up making these decisions that are like hover mode, where you do it and you realize, oh, that's actually taught me something about what this game is, and maybe this isn't the right thing, but it still means that you've progressed closer to that goal, right?
And on any other game, no one would ever see these trials and tribulations. They're hidden away, they're locked in a box, nobody talks about it ever again, and you only see the end result. But because we're so open, you see all the horrible bits, the bits that change, the bits that perhaps don't go the way people think they should go. And it's a really, it's a rewarding experience because you get to see those things, and we learn things as well.
One of my favorite sayings is, this is game development, not game construction. In a construction, you have all the blueprints laid out, you have all the engineering done, it's all there, and then it's basically a bunch of people, not to dismiss construction, I worked in construction for years, but they're basically following a plan every step of the way. From beginning to end, everything is known and everything is done. Development is not construction. Development is discovering that which you want to do through trial and error, through process of elimination. So
it's really fun in this project as well that in previous projects, when you go through that process, you can end up in an echo chamber of thinking about things. But in this project, when you do stuff like hover mode, you have the community to gauge how this feature works and what's wrong with it, and so you don't end up with this tunnel vision of looking at this feature and forgetting about everything else.
And then before we get to the questions, follow up on something you said: vehicle content teams and vehicle feature teams. Just dime store 10-cent version. What's the difference between a feature team and a content team? So
a feature team is primarily programmers with design support, and then we sort of dip into the other downstream teams, like maybe we'll be doing a feature like hover mode. So Dave would be doing programming, we'd have the design team retuning the ships, we'd need tech art to help make the thrusters behave visually how we want. Content teams is primarily just the ship art team and design, and then those same downstream teams making them. So they're making the actual ships. The feature teams are making the features that make the ships.
And then, of course, kind of outside in the periphery, you have the gameplay system designers who are doing things like mining or salvaging that are designed independently of the ships.
Yes, so the vehicle teams use those features that the other gameplay teams do. So we have other teams like the actor team who are dealing with things like healing and body dragging and all that sort of stuff that not vehicle-specific features, but vehicles will use them. Mining, a good example of something. So whilst the first instance of mining in Star Citizen was on a vehicle, it was developed as a general system that was then expanded into handheld mining.
Outside of the ship teams, which is why at times we can find ourselves with ships that have been fully developed and even released, while the gameplay systems are still being developed. A big example would be the Reclaimer. And salvage, So you were able to complete your work, with the content and the vehicle feature team building the ship, and now it sits with the gameplay teams to develop salvaging. All right, so with that, and then the newest edition, we've had content teams, we've had feature teams. Now we have an experience team. So what's the goal of the experience team?
So it's called vehicle experience because it sort of covers everything about the vehicle experience. It's not just limited to combat of how vehicles fight. It's the whole living, breathing aspect of experiencing, sounds cliche, but experiencing your ship. Because combat's like a byproduct of a bunch of other features. It's a byproduct of flying. So if flying your ship doesn't feel good, fighting in your ship doesn't feel good. If interacting with things in your ship isn't good, then flying your ship is going to be bad, and then combat's going to be bad. So it's sort of a holistic look at all these features that tie together the vehicle experience and working on them. So the first thing the vehicle experience team worked on was the new or improved camera systems, which went out in 3.8. So we had a prototype of this years ago, and it was like, that's a really nice thing. We've got other things to do at the time. So it's sort of simulating how TrackIO or other head-look programs do when you're flying and you look into the turns, like a race car driver does. And it, whilst functionally it doesn't give you any benefit to, like on paper, how ships behave, it makes that experience much more realistic. It makes it much more fun. It doesn't look like there's just a 2D printout of a ship cockpit stuck on the screen.
Right.
Makes it feel alive. You start feeling the ships they have their characters to them. It makes you have fun in the ships. Even though you're just flying around like you were in 3.7, it adds that extra layer to it.
A lot of vehicle experience teams is about supporting feature teams as well. So when feature teams are working on a feature, vehicle experience team can provide guidance on how that feature might interact with other systems so that the whole experience stays consistent and along the lines that we want it to.
Cool. All right, so with the housekeeping out of the way, we are ready to start taking questions from the community. As usual, we put a thread up in Spectrum earlier this week to collect questions from folks who maybe couldn't be here to watch us live. It also allows our viewers to vote up which questions they wanted to see answered most. The number one question that was appropriate for the show here, what is the situation on landing aids, such as radar and lighting?
So the main thing that we want with landing aids is the old radar view of the landing pad that we had in 2.5. I can't remember.
2.5.
Exactly.
Is it the one where you had the outline and it went from the top?
The problem with that is that it's a really complicated piece of 3D UI, and if you remember from the CitizenCon UI talk, a lot of the UI tech is being revamped at the moment, and one of the current focuses right now in January is 3D. And so we're kind of working with them at the moment to add a lot more 3D elements to all of the UI, HUDs, MFDs, etc. And obviously one of those things is the landing UI. So once that 3D UI tech is developed a bit more, we're going to come back and rebuild that landing aid. And then that in combination with lights facing down or cameras that face down will help that whole experience.
The first thing we did with the new building blocks UI was the 2D, because it's the easier side of it, and we saw that in the CitizenCon demo where you had the elevator panels that were the actual buttons you interact with. So that would traditionally have been all flash, which is great. You make that one elevator panel in another ship, now you make another one, and it's duplicating all, whereas with building blocks it's just sort of inheriting of style sheets is a very simplistic way of doing it. And then 3D is the next step. So we do actually have some very primitive 3D support now, but it's a whole different ballgame from rendering a cube to rendering one of our ships on it. So,
Sure.
And when you mention lights and cameras, I want to make sure that folks know those are things that we're exploring. This is not a guarantee that every ship is going to have a camera system underneath it, and that's not what you were intending to say. It's just we definitely know that there are ways to make landing easier.
Yeah, there's a lot of ships that their lighting state is suboptimal, and we want to go through and fix those. So primarily you have the headlights that you can actually see where you're flying. Some of them are a bit too dim, some of them are broken. Those will get fixed. And then we're going to look into having, when you're in a landing mode, you have landing lights that come on that show you, like a real life plane, that show you a more illuminated area beneath you.
Next question is, how's it going with that whole armor thing?
That whole armor thing.
That's what it says, is how's it going with that whole armor thing? Thanks, chat.
So I'm going to assume that's talking about physically based damage and armor.
Seems right.
So that is in production at the moment. It's something that Chris is actually helping out on. So
I was going to say, didn't you check something in with there's a switch or something you could turn it off?
yeah, he's got
He's a big fan of this.
a local version of the code where at the moment we define mass by a value in the XML, but how it's going to be is going to be defined off the actual vehicle's model and materials. So if we make a ship out of plastic material, it will work out the volume and the mass of it from that based on the materials that are applied. So it will behave like a plastic ship versus someone like me putting 10 million tons in the XML. So that's the groundwork for it. So the ships will be physically weighted is the wrong term, but they will be appropriately massed, appropriately sort of designed and set up with all the materials. So if it looks like metal, it's going to weigh like metal. If it looks like carbon fiber, it will be lighter,
Right.
but have the same tensile
So
strength.
it's not just a measurement of the volume, which is kind of what we're doing now. It's the volume plus the material.
So the ships aren't just one material, so there's sort of various aspects. So you might have a ship that's body is made of a really dense metal, but its wings are made of paper. Those will behave differently. So when you shoot bits off, it will not all just behave like, oh, this is 10% of the ship that's fallen off, so take 10% of the mass off, and it will go off like that. It will work out like that. And then that drives into the next step, which is penetration, drives into armor, moving away from just removing hit points, but sort of adjusting the strength of the material. It all starts happening.
Gotcha. So you need the system where it does the dynamic mass and stuff, and then you can start the system where you physically based damage penetrates and
the
starts
start of the
taking it
system
away.
is we need to work out what the ship is programmatically, because marking it all up is how we do it now, and that's not sustainable or using sort of the desired end system. At the moment we go, left wing has 500 hit points, right wing has 500 hit points, left end wing has 100 hit points. We're going to move to, it's the left wing, it's made of this material, work out what it should be.
And the system decides what it is. All right, cool. Are you happy with the current flight model?
We're a lot happier than we were a year ago, that's for sure.
The bits and pieces are getting to where we want it to be, but there's other areas that are definitely not.
So one of the things that's obviously a well-known upcoming feature this year is the thruster efficiency curves. And that's,
that's all I can talk about is the thruster efficiency
that's
curves.
probably like the most explored feature that we're working on at the moment. And part of that necessitates an aerodynamic rebalance of the ships. Because that's one area that I think is suboptimal at the moment, is the aerodynamics. It's pretty cool and it's pretty good, but especially when the thrusters are much weaker in atmosphere, the ship behaves differently than it has done before, because before the thrusters could overpower the aerodynamics, but now they're not so able to do. And so we're working a lot on both how the aerodynamics is calculated, how the drag is calculated and worked out on ships and stuff. And that will hopefully improve that whole experience. And then we're also adding jerk, which is the next derivative after acceleration. So that will make the ships a lot smoother and more dynamic feeling, and maybe not quite as rigid in their movements. And that will be something we work on in the future. And hopefully those two together will really make the ships feel a little bit more, especially obviously in atmosphere, and then in space they'll feel a little bit more alive, a little bit more interesting motion.
Those two things are sort of what we're trying to get to the end goal of what hover mode was trying to achieve in atmosphere, but doing it a different way.
Okay. And the next question is literally about how thruster reduction in atmosphere didn't make it into 3.8 and what your future plans are for atmospheric flight.
So part of the reason why it didn't make it into 3.8 is that it necessitated this aerodynamics change. We did it and we played it and we were like, okay, the ship kind of flies a little wacky now in atmosphere, so we need to go back and revisit how that aerodynamic stuff worked. We've also gone back and expanded the feature of it, so now the curves work very intricately on each thruster, which makes the tuning a little bit more time consuming to do, but it means you can, at some point in the future, if we ever allow you to change the thrusters on a ship, then you could have a different efficiency curve, for example, and the ship would react to that.
Let me give you a follow-up here. Where do we want to go with atmospheric flight? What's your vision of atmospheric flight? In an ideal world, whether we know how to get there, whether we've got all the tools now to do it or not, that's not what the question is. Where do you want this to get to?
I want this to get to something that feels more different. Like right now, the atmospheric flight is space flight, but with this extra thing like pushing on your ship. And we want to get it to more like how real planes fly, but with differences that are caused by how spaceships are designed. So,
Okay.
you know, for a lot of ships, they're not very aerodynamic, and so the way that they fly with pretty strong thrusters is still, even if it was perfectly realistic, it's still not how a plane would actually fly. And we want to try and capture that so that if you fly other plane games or you have some experience with how planes fly, you will realize that, oh, I can see how this is working, but it's a whole different experience because of how this ship works. And that's the experience that we want, which is this, like, you know, an interesting, deep aerodynamic model that is not, that's something new, that seems like it would be the most realistic outcome given the way the ships are designed.
Realistic by today's standards, but then 940 years advanced in the
Yeah.
future through the additional technology.
I say
space
realistic,
thrusters.
but it's our guess
Yeah.
at what realistic flight might be like in 900 years. That's really what it is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, because nobody's flown a spaceship 900
Sure.
years in the future in atmosphere. Like
Yeah.
you can do all the modeling you want, but
And then, of course, with a I suppose with a where you can see a drastic difference between flying an eclipse in an atmosphere and flying a
Yeah.
reclaimer
Yeah.
in an atmosphere. Next question: can a reclaimer take off from the surface of Daymar and reach orbit on its own?
Jared, this feels like deja vu. Yes, it will be able to.
All right, moving on. No, just moving along.
Yeah.
Look,
Is it a final
if you
answer?
know, you know, and if you don't, all right. After the release of the 300 series as the first customizable ships in Star Citizen, what lessons did you learn, and how will you apply them to the next customizable ship?
So it was a really interesting experience, I think, for all the departments that were involved in it, because it was almost a cross-company, cross every single studio that we have in CIG and Turbulent to pull it together, to deliver it. I don't think there's many features that Star Citizen has where it touches every single studio that has to pull together. Like, normally it's a couple of studios and then one might support,
Right.
but we're all working on it at the same time. So we learned a lot about cross-studio, cross-time zone communication and planning from that. We learned a lot on the art side of the technical limits that we could do. Something we wanted to do was proper interior material customization, and we didn't have the ability to do that. So what we did was these seats and beds that gave you that experience, and we made the interior of the ship sort of respect all of those various combinations. We tried out all these interesting interactive props that they took a lot of time, and I think they were actually one of the most popular bits of it. What we thought was really popular would be the paint, but it wasn't as popular as other aspects that we'd done. So we learned what people liked, what people wanted. We got a huge amount of feedback from the community on it. In terms of manpower, it's sort of doing something to the extent of the 300i again is equivalent to another ship in the pipeline. So when we choose to do another one, you sort of have to bear in mind that it's that block of time. It's not like a 1 week task to knock out a few paint jobs and these items. It is a lot of time and a lot of people that go into doing that.
Presumably, the second time would be faster, more efficient than the first time, because the first time is always about all these lessons that have to be learned, quite honestly, the hard way.
Yeah.
You know, I think most lessons in life, if not game development, are learned the hard way. At least that's been my experience. So, you know, that was that first time, you know, learning all these things the hard way, discovering what we wanted to do, what we could do, what we couldn't do. So conceivably, the second time would be more efficient than that.
It would absolutely be more efficient.
Still, though, it's a pretty sizable outlay. It's not to say that we're not going to do it. We absolutely are. We're committed to. We really like this idea. I know Chris is behind it. It's just a matter of finding the right place, the right time, the right situation in order to. In order to
definitely
bring it
got
back.
plans to do more of it.
Let's see. Let's look for the chat here. Will the new shield tech actually fix the holes in the ships?
Yes, it will. The new shield tech. So previously we had a mesh that was
every part of the ship
yeah
has a duplicated, expanded mesh that is what detects the shield. So, as you can imagine, ships have lots of parts. It's easy for bits to not quite
not quite meshed together. So the way the new shield tech works is we have a thing called an SDF, which is
Sign distance field.
it's a signed distance field, and is a sort of force field around the ship that encodes how far away at every point that point is from the ship. And so using that, you could say here's a bullet, and then ask this SDF how far away you are from a surface on the ship. And that's all calculated to like programmatically, dynamically. It's not a mesh. And so it's much more reliable at figuring that out, and it's not going to have any holes because it's just programmatically generated from whatever the ship's shape is.
Yeah, unless the ship has holes in it.
Yes, yeah.
Fair enough. I was going to say,
Obviously,
like,
yes.
I feel like we've heard about this sign distance field tech being used for shields for a while now, but it's not currently in game. I'm not asking you when. I'm saying what's been the delay? What's been the delay? What's been the struggle?
So sort of twofold. There's the actual teams making use of these sign distance fields, like the vehicle feature team will be working on making the old shield system use the new shield system. We've got bits and pieces done, that's fine. Once we've done that, then the VFX team have to essentially go and reauthor all the shield effects for all the ships, because at the moment you have the blue sort of splashy effect, and you actually have hit effects coming off it. They need to, because the old system uses something completely different to anything else in game, they need to make a new shield hit effect for SDFs. So they've got to do all that. But one of the biggest challenges is actually on the core engine side is this is a new file format that has to be baked into our existing assets. Okay. The resource compiler, when we're making the builds, has to automatically do this. But to do it, someone needs to mark up what of the ship should be made. So it's working out all these core pipelines for a tech artist has to go into the ship file and go, the ship is these parts. Because if we just let the compiler go, I'm going to do everything in the ship, it's going to be making SDFs for like the buttons on the cockpit or the joysticks, which is just unnecessary time to do it and time to compile it and time to, or hard drive space for actually building these things. So we want to only use the exterior. So someone has to go mark those up. Then we had to make it so the builds actually picked up that data, generated it. And then there's a little bit of work still to come that's not blocking us at the moment from progressing, but a lot of our ships animate.
Right, so the sign distance field has to adjust.
It has to dynamically adjust to those things, because the old system, it was just a part attached to the wing. So when the wing animated, it moved with it for free.
Easy.
Sign distance fields don't do that out of the box. And it's not just using sign distance fields for shields, we want to use it on other things as well. So that same sign distance field we'll use for atmospheric entry. So at the moment, when you come into an atmosphere, you get the glowy stuff on the front of your ship. If you went in backwards, you still get the front bit on the front of your ship, because it's just attached to your ship in that area. And we could do one for every single area of the ship to account for that, but that's just a huge amount of work. So sign distance field will allow us to play that effect on the appropriate face when you're going in.
Assuming you're going fast enough.
Assuming you're going fast enough.
I was, the last couple of times I entered, I wasn't getting it. I'm like, why isn't this working? And then Mikey goes, you just aren't going fast enough. I'm like, oh, when I sped up my engine there it was, I'm like, oh, it's procedural then. Or systemic rather. So it sounds like there's some prerequisite work that needs to be done for that. The next question is actually about some prerequisite work that has already been done. Several of our ships with hatches, like the Freelancer, Constellation, Caterpillar, have hatches built into them already. When ship-to-ship docking is implemented, will these ports be compatible with each other, or are we going to have to see a redesign to a standardized port?
So we do actually have two standards for ports. So we have the circular ones that you see on a lot of ships. Those are 2 meter diameter, so it's big enough for a player to just walk straight through. We don't need to do any. If the docking collars are on side to side, you'll literally just be able to walk through them. So any that are circular will be 2 meters diameter. If they're not, those ones will be changed. I think there's one on the Reclaimer that's like 1.8 or something like that. So things like that will go and change. And then we have the rectangular ones that you see. The best example is the one on the front of the hammerhead in the mouth. It's 4 meters by 2 meters. That's the larger capital ship standardized docking port. So the Idris has them, the Javelin has them, and space stations support both of those. For when we have docking in game, we have these, like you see at an airport, a jet bridge that goes out, and on the end of it is a small round one and a large rectangular one. So any ships with docking collars would be able to dock at any space station that has that. And square peg, round hole, round ones to round ones, square ones to square ones. We don't really support a small ship with a round collar docking onto a larger square one, because the larger square one's probably going to take half the ship inside it trying to dock.
Yes, I'm picturing the freelancer trying with a square, or with a circle hatch, trying to dock with the front of the hammerhead, the square.
It's just going to be
eat it.
half the top of the ship will be in there. It's not to say in the future we might have like specialised docking boarding ships that do some funky 2-in-1 door, but those will be the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah. So most of that work's already been done. Those ships were built or they were rebuilt previously to those metrics.
And manned turret access hatches, they're also 2-meter diameter, so when turrets get blown off, there's another way into your ship.
Another hatch.
Yep.
Let's see. Is it still allowed to allow players to paint their ships? Or still allowed? I guess it's still planned to allow players to
still
paint
planned. The extent of it, we're still sort of going backwards and forwards on. We actually had some discussions this week on it. Obviously, with the Origin customizer, we provided preset colors for that. That is definitely something we're going to do. How far we let users customize the colors beyond that is still to be determined. But what we do want to definitely do is letting users pick emblems or decals to go on their ships, naming their ships. Obviously, they'll have the serial numbers put on there. And the emblems themselves will be from a pre-selected pool of things. So trying to think of a good example. The Vanguard on its upper wings has like a 42 decal on it, and it's 42, 42, and it's 42 on the tail fins as well. That would be a generic decal slot. So when you go to a paint shopping game, you go, I want to change that from the default, I want it to be a big smiley face or a star or something, and then it would apply it to all of those things.
And I can already see it in chat for those of you who remember very early conversations about the potential for uploading emblems or orgs. This is not to say that that's not a possibility. It's just that's not in the design that we're looking at right now. What the future holds, the future will hold. You start with what we can do, with what's internal, with what we can provide you first, and then we examine those possibilities afterwards. So
having a nice pre-selected pool stops what we all know people will do.
Yep.
Solve some problems.
Let's see. Let's go back to the chat here. Altimeter? Altimeter? Anybody? Altimeter?
Coming at some point, yes.
Coming at some point, yes.
With the HUD rework, which we're still working on.
Yeah. Okay. What thought is being put towards the multi-crew experience in terms of vehicle designs to encourage multi-crew play beyond just being glorified murder buses?
There's a few parts to this, and one of them that we're kind of focusing on more at the moment is the MFD screens, because the MFD screens are obviously like a big part of how you interact with ships, and so we're working on an MFD rework that will come in the future. And part of that discussion is obviously how are MFDs going to work with multi-crew, and what is that system for doing it? So we're still kind of working through this, but obviously we are exploring the options of like having unique MFDs for certain stations and ships, or having like maybe some kind of permission system where you can allow certain players in certain seats to control certain things about the ship. Because right now, pretty much, I think in a lot of ships, when you sit down in the pilot seat, it takes MFD control away from the other seats, and so there isn't really any adequate multi-crew gameplay there. So that's the first part, and then I think, John, the other part of multi-crew is like more physical things that you can do in the ship and interact with.
Going back to the eloquently put murder bus.
It's not that we don't like murder buses. We'll continue to have murder buses. It's just we want more.
So, a lot of the multi-crew stuff at the moment is purely because turrets are the best way of getting people in a ship and doing something. The mole expanded on that nicely, so it's less lethal. And we've seen people having huge amounts of fun together in a group, communicating and working together to get the best they can out of that ship. So outside of the UI, it's making sure the ships have sort of reasons to work together. A big thing we're missing is having the items inside the ships and having them be damageable and repairable, because as soon as you have that in, there's your engineer role out the box. So that gives someone something to do. The UI side helps pilots and co-pilots work together, helps a captain control his crew, hopefully, navigators setting stuff, all requires the UI to work together. Because at the moment, like you say, when you sit in a seat, you grab control. It's very binary. The person that was in the other seat doesn't know that they've lost control, so they're trying to press the buttons. Nothing happens because the guy over here now can do that, and they don't see what each other are doing. So that's a big
Can
failure.
often look like a bug, actually.
Yeah,
I was using this panel 2 minutes ago, and I come back to this panel and I can't use it. It's because somebody else is sat in some other chair. And
Yeah,
next to
especially
control
if you're sat in somewhere away from the bridge, like on an engineer station, you're just happily moving power around. It's like, oh, I'm seeing stuff happen, and then someone just gets in the pilot seat, they take control, you're doing this, it doesn't do anything anymore.
Right. All right. Do you plan to add aim assistance to turrets? Aim assist.
They do actually have a small amount of like aim assist at the moment, but it's not enough or sort of appropriate for what we're doing. So we want to add gimbal assist to turrets, which will help sort of smooth out. The turrets are one of the tricky things to do because the ships are moving so quickly. So one of the other things Vehicle Experience is doing is trying to bring those combat ranges in at the moment. Sort of that was one of the goals with the new flight model, was to sort of bring it in, and we've been slowly working over the last year to try and do that. We're aware people aren't fighting as close as we want them to, which in turn makes turrets worse because you can't see what you're trying to shoot at. Yeah. So yeah, but putting gimbal assist on is not the ultimate solution. It's one of the solutions to getting turrets better.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that with Todd last week. Turrets are in my Three Amigos joke I made last week, are El Guapo.
That's true.
That Three Amigos is a movie that you absolutely have not seen.
Okay. That's true. I've not even heard of that.
Yeah.
Have you not even heard of the Three Amigos?
No. I'm sorry.
Okay. But turrets have been a struggle for Stars,
Yeah.
and I don't think that's a mystery to anybody. We've made a number of improvements. We've made things better. There were some improvements in 3.8. Still not quite where we want. When we talk about adding additional aim assist, because there is a little, we do want to make sure that we're not taking the skill away. It's like Star Citizen, which combat Star Citizen should still be a skill-based affair. Yeah. This is more about making people with, let's just say, my skill set, which is on the lower end of space combat. I don't think that's a mystery to anybody who's played with me. Making that experience a little more enjoyable for me, for the people who don't focus on combat. Let's say that instead of saying that I suck. I just don't focus on combat.
Especially as turrets they're a very defensive thing. Some ships are offensive ones, but the majority of the time you're trying to stop someone from damaging your ship. So any help you have in that regards.
Unless you're in a hammerhead.
I
find a hammerhead is a very offensive turret.
The perfect murder bus.
Yeah. All right. Can we get a mouse wheel controlled speed limiter, like on ships, but for ground vehicles? It would make speed control a lot easier with keyboard and mouse players.
That is an excellent idea. We're kind of evaluating ground vehicles as well at the moment.
They're another thing like turrets that are, we know they're not where they need to be, and it's something we're definitely.
So that idea is really cool because it sort of unifies that control between space vehicles and on foot and ground vehicles. So we'll add it to our pool of
explorations.
Yeah, exactly. Our pool of explorations and ideas that we'll evaluate when we help out ground vehicles.
This touches on a really good point. On the surface, this seems like a good idea. Sitting here and hearing it, I can't think of a reason why it would be a bad idea, and we're not thinking about reasons. But that's why it's important to put these things through testing, because all games, but especially Star Citizen, are a combination of a myriad of game systems that are all working together and all interact on each other. And standing on its own, on its own without any interactions, it might work fine. But with a dozen other systems that are at play inside a vehicle, inside a ground vehicle, it may cause unforeseen issues. So it still needs to be explored, it still needs to be tested, it still needs to be vetted before we can sit here and say, yeah, we'll do it, which is what we're not saying.
Yeah.
Will ground vehicles require to be refueled or recharged?
That's another thing to add to the idea pot. I think right now they have power plants. Right?
They do have power plants, which are currently sort of an infinite supply nuclear power plant, which perfect ground vehicle, just driving around with your nuclear power plant in the back.
I think part of the issue right now is that places to refuel your ground vehicle are not, like, they're few and far between.
Mm-hmm.
I can see in the future them having some cost, so you can't just run them to perpetuity. But it's probably not going to be as harsh as the vehicles are, because it's a lot easier to get, say, a Starfarer to a stranded spaceship and give it some fuel than it is to get some jerry cans and go trek across the desert to recover.
Jerry cans. Fair enough. Let's see, from the chat here. Have you considered climbing points for ships, for parts of a ship where it would make sense, i.e. the colorless black side doors or bottom of the ladders, so you can still get into a ship when things go awry?
So that's actually something that I have to do once I get out of here, is I've got to go over to Tech Art's desk, because they've actually gone and done this on a few of the ships. There are problems with that. The current sort of ledge grab system we have doesn't do a check for what's at the end of the ledge. So you can go ledge grab, say you've got the cutlass side doors, they're open, we've got a ledge grab on there, you go run up to your ship, you ledge grab in, great. If someone shuts the doors, it's still going to try and make you do that.
No, okay.
But it's probably going to be a coin flip of, do you just go straight through the doors, or do you hit the doors and fall back out again? So yeah, it's something we want to do, but we want to do it in a way that it's a bit smarter about it. So if the doors are closed and you try and ledge grab up, don't just fall off rather than go through the whole state of
It's
checking.
worth pointing out as well that that kind of an engineering decision that has meant that check doesn't happen is usually because of a trade-off. Like, in a lot of situations in environments, a check like that is not necessary, and putting one in would be like a cost to performance that maybe is not worth it. But in the particular case of a ship, then maybe that cost is worth it, or maybe there's another solution that isn't as expensive.
Yeah, there's the other aspect of that is, like, the doors not opening all the way down to the planet is another case of making them, rather than just be a canned animation, is systemic or procedurally opening them to the point they hit the floor and then back off a tiny little bit, so they don't lift the ship up. So we tend to be safe on the amount we can do, which, as people will have seen, when you start landing at really funny angles and you've got one leg off the ground, puts the ramps into this position. So the two are sort of tied together. There's things we can do, but often they cause more problems than they solve, and we need to be smarter about how we check it.
It's literally the next question. More often than not, ramps and elevators never touch the ground, leaving the players unable to climb back up into their ships or loaded vehicles.
Yeah.
What are we doing? We
That.
basically just touch that.
Same answer, yeah.
So, I want to make sure your question got read. Will Gravlev bikes like the Dragonfly and Nox ever be able to travel at their former max ground speeds in the thick atmosphere like Daymar, Hurston, Microtech, etc.?
Maybe yes. However, part of the reason why the speeds are lower now is because when we, reevaluated Gravlev with the new flat model, we decided that we wanted it to be sort of closer to the ground and a little bit more exciting. Like, the old Gravlev, you ended up kind of riding over the rocks and trees.
It was more like flying low.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but being on a speeder or
And
something.
we wanted it to be like down close to the ground, stuff flying past you at full speed. But the problem with that is that there's a lot of
Say it.
obstacles.
Say the word. Rocks.
There's a lot of rocks.
There's a lot of rocks.
So
In
many
some
rocks.
situations it's trees, Jared.
That's fair. That's
Yeah.
fair.
But anyways, there's a lot of obstacles. And so traveling at super high speeds makes the gameplay just really annoying because you just constantly hit things.
And you never get to those speeds anyway because you're hitting stuff.
Yeah. So that's why the speeds are lower. But if, for example, we find a solution to making that less painful, then yes, we could potentially increase the speeds. Or maybe, maybe there's some places on planets where there's not as many rocks, and then we can let the speeds go higher.
It's all about trade-offs, like we mentioned before. We didn't just take it away because we wanted to. There's reasons for doing that.
I don't know, the first idea in my head was similar to how cars have different, drive modes. Like going uphill or whenever, if you're in a manual transmission, the typical things like an off-road mode, when you're going off-road, and when you're on the plains of a desert or whatever, and it's just sand or whatever. It's okay. Let's open it up and maybe
Still rocks.
Still rocks.
still rocks. Yeah, we do like our rocks. Will we see the return of boost in wheeled ground vehicles?
See, we were discussing this yesterday, and I think it's still there on some vehicles. So it's going to be a case of, I don't think it went away intentionally. It just may have broken on some vehicles. Certainly, the Cyclone RC still has flames that come out of its exhausts. Don't ask how that works with the nuclear power plant, but they do. And it does go faster when you boost. So
It wasn't an intentional.
yeah, it wasn't an intentional thing. And when I saw that question in the thread, I went and checked. I was like, it's still here. So if it's broken in 3.8, then it's probably going to be fixed in 3.9.
It's definitely still a key binding for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go back to the chat here. Let's see. Okay, so folks have seen the patch notes for the Cutlass Red on the PTU. It says, will the Cutlass Red med beds work similarly to how the 890 jump med beds are in the PTU on its upcoming release?
I have some extra features more than the 890s as well.
Oh, there.
Let's save those. We got a thing.
There's a lot of messaging that's going to come out
It's a lot of mess.
in the next few days that explains everything.
Cool. You'll learn more about the Cutlass Red in short order. I tried. How is drag calculated for each ship? Currently, they have weird values, with some bricks being very aerodynamic, while sleek ships and are super slow. We talked about that. The question that just sets up, how do we plan to improve the system? I know we were talking about a voxel thing. That's what I want you to get to.
I have a really good answer for this. This is interesting to me. So currently what we do is we voxelize the ship.
You said it was a really good answer. You got to have more than that. If it's
Okay,
really,
so we
just don't usually have somebody that's like, oh, I've got a really good answer to that.
We
Why would
break
you
the
set
ship
yourself
down.
up
All right,
like
Jerry.
that? We will judge the quality of this answer. Go ahead.
So we take the shape of the ship, right, and we break it up into little cubes, okay? And then in each of the dominant directions, we'll calculate the area of those cubes, right?
Okay.
So we get an idea for the surface area in different airflow directions, and then we'll use that surface area to control how strong the drag is. So for example, if you're flying Gladius like this, the surface area is like this little tiny section here. If you fly it like this, the drag is significantly more because it's this huge section, right? That's what it does now. But there's another bit that's complicating this, which is that on a lot of ships, the main thrusters are super, super powerful, and they can overpower the drag a lot of the time. And so this is kind of what we wanted to do with that thrust efficiency curve thing is, because we've reduced the strength of the thrusters, the top speeds of the ships are now significantly lower because the drag was so high previously. So now we can decrease the drag and make it more in line with what it should be because the thrusters are so much weaker. And then it behaves a lot more correctly. But there's an extra thing that we're exploring. And we're just kind of in the early ideas of seeing if this would even work, which is using the SDF tech that we're using on the shields to work out the shape of the ship, so that instead of just having like a surface area in front of the ship, we can use the SDF to figure out the actual shape. So for example, a wedge shape like this would behave differently to a shape that's like a flat wall like this, and the SDF would give us that information. And depending on how that exploration goes, that could result in the shape of the ship mattering a lot more than it does now, because you could have two surface areas that are the same, but they have a different shape, and so they'll behave differently. And that will make a huge difference, assuming it works.
Solid
10 out of 10.
7 out of 10.
Yeah, all right. I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you. I'll cross that one off. What's going on with MFDs? Multiple ships have them bugging out, losing the ability to interact with them. We touched on that a little bit
We
before.
did,
Yeah.
That's pretty much a similar answer. So there are issues with MFDs that are not what we mentioned before, which is that the permission system is pretty simple. So when someone sits in a seat, you lose control over the MFD. That's one issue. That's a huge issue. It comes up a lot. But there are other issues.
Usability is a big
Usability.
one we're going to hit, because really you're forced into using a mouse and keyboard on them, and we want whatever device you're using to use them, and to use them quickly, because there's nothing worse than trying to use a really finicky, small interface in the heat of battle to do something, and you've got to drop your joystick, get my mouse out. So we want it to be a lot more intuitive, but still provide that same depth of information. I
think Jared will come back for another SC Live to talk about MFDs at some point.
Yeah, almost certainly.
We got a lot of stuff that we're exploring with that right now. That's really exciting. There's loads of stuff we can do, like, I don't know, saving the state of your MFDs and maybe customizing them, navigating with a joystick, all sorts of stuff like that. There's loads of stuff that's really cool.
There's really loads of neat things that don't actually add anything to the functionality, but help the experience of the ship as well. And that at the moment, when you get out the seat, so the frame you hit exit, your screens go off. We'll be able to keep them on, so that means they stay. Because when you get out of the seat, it sort of looks like your ship turns off because all your screens go off.
Right.
We'll be able to keep them on. Other people will be able to see what you're doing on your screens rather than just looking at someone mindlessly moving a blank screen around.
I will admit to being very confused the first time I got out of it. I thought it auto-powered off.
Yeah.
And I was wrong. Can we get more organic, let it overheat until the system slowly starts breaking instead of the current hold 2 seconds and then get an overheat timeout?
So we chatted about this some time ago. So right now the thrusters have this safety feature where they'll turn off when you start to get uncomfortably hot, in the same way that a CPU turns off when it gets too hot. But we had discussed the idea that you could optionally just not have that safety feature and push the thrusters to be hot. And they'll be damaged, they'll be worn, they'll take physical damage, and maybe they'll start to fail and misfire.
Yeah.
But you wanted that, you get it.
And a sort of byproduct of the quite short amounts that we have at the moment is you don't really notice the granularity of that. Quite often if you're trying to afterburn out of atmosphere, you just go straight through the warnings of thruster overheating, straight into overheated, start falling back. You're still holding afterburn, you get caught in that. It cools down enough to let you afterburn again, then you go straight back into the overheating. So on top of all that stuff that Dave mentioned, we're always looking at the tunings of these things. Maybe they're a bit too aggressive on some ships, and we're always going to sort of look and tweak them. They're not all just 2 seconds, but maybe they need to be a little bit more on some ships.
That's fair. Can they add some soft music to the background of these streams? Well, that's from Molly. Hi, Molly. Hi, Molly. We actually occasionally do music on the back under these streams. We usually do them under the ones where we're doing the creative stuff, where we're sitting at somebody's desk. It's always kind of a crapshoot because depending on what people are wearing when they're listening to it, whether the mix is always hard. We're not always the best with our audio mix. I don't think that's a mystery either. So sometimes it's just simpler to make sure that the words can be heard than try to do music. But we try. Every once in a while we do try to squeeze some music under there. Also from the chat, are the mass drivers intended to be that strong like they are now?
So mass drivers and neutron cannons had a bit of a bug that I thought we'd actually fixed in 3.8, in that they were doing more damage than they should have been. Certainly neutrons were doing that. We see in the analytics when a weapon is broken, because within a day or so everyone's going out and buying it and using it. So they were definitely skipping the damage states incorrectly, or doubling up on damage. And no, they're not supposed to be as effective as they are, but they won't be, if they're still bugged, they won't be bugged in the next full release.
Every time I hear about the neutron repeaters, I think of the neutron disintegrator from Howard the Duck, which is another movie.
not seen it.
I know you haven't seen it. David Colson has not seen most movies. What types of things do you study to learn how to do additional flight improvements?
We study a lot of physics. I don't know how to say that in like a really exciting, cool way. We do a lot of research. We have a lot of contacts that are real pilots, and we sort of ask them a lot of questions and learn about their experiences and the sort of things that you maybe might not get in like a textbook for physics or even like a manual for a plane. And that stuff is kind of all brought together along with a bunch of other research to sort of get a picture both of the technical details and the experience of using a plane or a jet fighter or something that we also use that information.
There's a lot of hands-on, not that we go out and fly spaceships.
I was going to say, you said hands-on. I was like, wait, what?
But there's obviously a lot of games, they do things differently. So we're always looking at how other things do it, and sometimes there's nice bits in there that work nicely, but that wouldn't work with Star Citizen. Mm-hmm. So what about if we did things like this on top of all the research, on top of all the simulation? At the end of the day, it's got to be fun to play. If it's not fun to play, then nobody's going to play it.
Nothing else matters.
It doesn't matter how realistic it is.
Flat tires. Will that be a repair thing on ground vehicles? You want flat tires? Is that what you're asking? You want flat tires?
As long as it's not like really annoying. Like imagine driving over Daymar and just getting a flat tire every 10 minutes.
All those rocks giving you
I
flat
was going to
tires.
say, yeah, there's nothing.
It could be really annoying. But assuming it's not, we could explore something
Yeah,
like that.
wheels have damage states. At the moment, they just sort of crumple. But
Part of the issue is because the physics is like this super systemic, like moving tire physics collider.
Right.
If you damage that collider, the physics can break down really quickly.
yeah,
And so we tend to keep them in a pretty good state a lot of the time to keep the simulation stable. Because if we don't do that, it kind of can get out of control, and maybe you just lose like one tire and it just becomes a nightmare. It's just, you know.
we had that a lot. The tires on, I think the Cyclone came off if someone breathed on them, and that just completely immobilized the Cyclone. You'd be driving along on a completely flat surface with no rocks, and just a wheel would fall off because you hit like a 1-inch dip in the ground. So we sort of not disabled it, but made it become increasingly unlikely to happen because it just completely ruined the experience of them. And you've got no way to get the vehicle back to repair it, so it's just left there.
All right, so we are wrapping up here. Just a couple more questions. Will we ever be able to just burst out a multi-tool and actually physically repair our ships?
Yes.
What are your thoughts? Yeah?
Yeah, that's always been the plan. Combination of multi-tool, having a sort of a repair thing, and physically going and getting sub-items or entire replacement items in there, just to sort of top up the gaps. It's a combination of all those things. So maybe it's not the multi-tool, maybe it'll be a specific repair tool. But there's the swapping items, sub-items, swapping the whole items.
What is the most effective way of giving feedback to the new vehicle experience team?
So posting on Spectrum and telling us about your problems and your experiences is absolutely the most useful. Very often, I think people like to be helpful, and so they give us suggestions about things that would make the game better.
They suggest solutions.
Yes, but
Without the problem.
We
Without
need
the problem.
to be able to implement a solution like that. We need to understand the problem that you have, and so if you help us in understanding the problem, we can implement that solution and understand that solution much more effectively. So yeah, just post on the forums and tell us about your experiences and the issues that you have, and why maybe you think you're having those issues, and help us empathize with your experience, and then it'll be much easier for us.
Player Relations also do surveys and sort of feedback reports with every patch cycle that goes to all the relevant people. So we see like the most common things that are happening, and then it's working out the solutions from that. So those reports sort of aggregate all the problems, so we get to see them. But it's problems for everything. So yeah, talking in the forum, Spectrum, we can collect it.
And for those experience reports, those are run by Bayer, if I'm not mistaken. So check those out. I believe there's a special section on Spectrum for those. A special section on Spectrum. Wow, there's a lot. I did it. There's a special section on Spectrum for those. And of course, when you're talking about sharing the problems, suggesting solutions, always helpful, always continue to do that. It's just being as detailed as you can about the problems is generally more helpful, because with a bunch of interrelated systems, very often the cause of something, even if it seems obvious, may not be the actual cause of that thing. And so that can tend to lead us down the wrong path.
Some of the best feedback I've ever seen is like, here's this thing that is going wrong in gameplay. Here's 5 things that I think might fix that.
Yeah.
That's like, great, very helpful.
Yeah.
Yes, but just in case you aren't that creative, so still explaining your problem, being as detailed about it as you can, being as dispassionate. This is one of those situations where try to remove emotion out of it. It just helps. We do have a very passionate and dedicated fan base, and that's tremendous, and you want to keep that. It's just in presenting feedback reports. It's more clinical you can be about it, tends to be the better. Finally, last question. What's your biggest lesson learned about vehicles from 2019 that you would take with you going forward? It's the biggest one.
Well, that's a hard question.
Probably saved it for last.
I think for me, the biggest lesson is in how to listen to the community about feedback. I feel like I'm going off the back of the last question, but it honestly is the most significant one. Learning how to interact with the community, learning what is important to them, is a skill that I got much better at in 2019.
I think for me, it's the content side is something that we've already put into motion, is working on ships with fewer people. So we work on more ships, but they run longer. Because in the past, we've been guilty of putting a ton of people on a ship to just try and get it done. And you're all working on top of each other, trying to cram stuff in.
10 doctors delivering it one baby faster.
You get the ship technically quicker, but it's a significantly greater human cost on that side. So it's taking a step back, rather than having 10 people work on 2 ships. It's having 10 people work on 5 ships. So you work on it for a year instead of 6 months for a ship, and that allows you to take it slower, put more time and effort in. If something goes wrong, you've got longer to correct it, rather than if someone was ill for a week, that's a huge amount of time in a 3-month schedule, versus over a year, it's something that is easily accounted for. So people will see that in the ship schedule over 2020 is more ships, less often. So there'll be more in development at any one time, but they won't all be coming out like 3 or 4 in a patch. They'll be spread out more.
What ships are coming out in 2020? Tell me all of them.
Carrick.
As usual, keep your eye on the public roadmap for all the information about ship-related releases throughout the rest of the year. John, Dave, thank you so much for flying all the way to California just to be here on this show. I'm sure you had no other responsibilities. For those of you out in Star Citizen land, PAX South is this weekend. We have a number of CIG developers from our Austin studio that will be in attendance around town, mingling. So if you are in the San Antonio area and you see somebody in these incredibly stylish hoodies that we didn't
We all match.
Yeah, we didn't plan this. Be sure you stop them, say hi, say Jared sent you, and he told me I should bother you, and then just follow them around for 5-6 hours. They will really appreciate that. There is also a Bar Citizen event on Saturday night. You can find out all the details at barcitizen.sc, assuming they haven't changed the URL since the last time I looked, realizing it's been a while. So check that out, Bar Citizen, tomorrow night. It's at the Riverwalk Beer Garden. It's there every year. It's always the big event there every year, so be sure to check that out. We already said our goodbyes. So for that, I'm Jared Huckabee. This has been Star Citizen Live. We'll see you next week, everybody. Take care.
Thanks for watching. For the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42, you can subscribe to our channel, or you can check out some of the other shows, and you can also head to our website at www.robertsspaceindustries.com. Thank you very much for watching.